Good morning, everybody. You are listening to K-Talk Radio, 1640 AM. This is the show, Utah Home Sweet Home. I'm your host, Yoshi Shiraki. Our special guest is real estate attorney Jeff Braylio. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So today's topic, guys, is seller financing. Now, you probably heard the term before. You may or may have not heard the term before, but for those of you who have heard the term before, you're probably wondered, how's it structured? How does it go down? And you know, with so much uncertainty in the world right now, there have been a lot of loan packages that have been discontinued that were, available just as early as this year, and they no longer exist. So I have a feeling that seller financing will be a phenomenal opportunity in the next 12 to 24 months for a lot of people to be able to purchase homes. So
Yeah, and sell. So you have to remember seller finance from both the seller perspective and the buyer perspective.
Yep.
Right?
Right.
There are a lot of sellers that, especially if they lose their job or have a downgrade in pay, can't make mortgage,
Right.
Find themselves in financial trouble, need to move. This could be a good opportunity, especially if they're thin on their equity in the house.
Yep.
And the market downturn, they can't sell their house for any equity, and they can't sell on the open market.
Right.
Seller financing is an option for sellers to be able to relieve themselves of a burden and pass the house on to somebody who can manage it.
Very great point. Very great point. So I'm excited to hear a little bit more about seller financing. I've actually done some seller financing myself, but I wouldn't say I'm the expert. I'd say Jeff's the expert. Jeff is who I go to structure my seller financing.
Yes, I've seen a few in my day.
Yes. So let's just start off by if you don't mind, Jeff, explain to the listeners out there who may have never heard of seller financing. What does that exactly mean? Because they're probably thinking, how am I going to finance the sale of my house?
Yes, seller financing in the real estate investor world is a very large topic. Mm-hmm. So it covers a lot of ground. It covers a lot of types of transactions. And so there's really kind of four main ways of seller financing. Broadly speaking, seller financing is anytime the seller helps out the buyer in purchasing the house.
Got it.
Right? It could be helping finance a portion of the house or partner with them on the house. In some way, the seller is helping the buyer either get into or manage the property, and there's some relationship between the buyer and the seller. Because in most retail transactions, the seller sells the house to the buyer, and after closing, the seller literally disappears. They can go anywhere they want, never matter, because there's no more relationship with the buyer. The buyer gets the house and goes on their merry way.
Right.
But in seller financing, there's going to be this relationship that exists between the buyer and the seller, even after the closing or after the transaction.
Gotcha. Perfect. And usually it's primarily because the current loan that was in place when the seller owned it stays in place, right?
Yeah, well, if there's a couple of variations on that. So, sometimes the seller might own the house outright.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And the seller is, maybe concerned about capital gains taxes.
Yes.
Right? If the amount of equity in the house is greater than $250,000 or $500,000, those capital gains tax exemptions, they may be concerned about a tax burden.
Yeah.
Or they could be looking for some extra income.
Right.
And if they finance the portion of the purchase price to the buyer, they can actually make interest income and make more than actually what they sold the house for. So they can make more money.
Right.
There's a lot of benefits to the seller that may encourage the seller to sell or finance the deal, even if they have no mortgage.
Right.
And sometimes if they do have a mortgage and equity even, there are ways that the seller can make more money or avoid taxes by doing a seller financing transaction and even leaving that mortgage in place.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. So, if you don't mind sharing, what kind of seller financing strategies are available?
Yeah, I would categorize these as sort of four main ones.
Okay.
Well, four big ones.
Okay.
And two that are mostly used here in Utah.
Okay.
So the first one, I'll just give an example. This is a situation where the seller will actually partner with the buyer on the property. This is usually a situation where maybe the house is a little run down, can't really sell on the retail market, maybe there's some issues with the house that need to be corrected and the seller doesn't have money to fix the problems to be able to sell it on the open market.
Got it.
It could be The deal that I just recently did was there was a sewer crack out at the street, so it was a $15,000 fix.
Got it.
Seller does not have $15,000, but
Right.
there was some equity in the house, so he certainly didn't want to unload the house super cheap to a real estate investor looking for a profit.
Yeah. Right.
So just selling it to an investor wouldn't work, selling on the retail market wouldn't work. So we went in with a solution of partnering with the seller. And so the seller had a place to move temporarily, so we partnered with the seller. We did not, as an investor, we didn't buy the house, we didn't own the house.
Yeah.
We had no mortgage in our name, we had no financing in place at all, other
Right.
than the underlying mortgage. That we did take over.
Okay.
They were super cheap, so we would pay the underlying mortgage.
Okay.
Went in with about $25,000.
Okay.
Repaired the sewer, which was the main thing.
Got
and then
it.
we did paint and carpet.
Nice.
Because other than that, the house was fairly decent shape, but it did need paint and carpet. We painted the cabinets. So about a $10,000, $8,000 remodel.
Gotcha.
Aside from the sewer line. And then we split the profits.
Nice.
So originally the seller probably would have netted, if he sold it on the MLS, he could have,
Yeah.
even if he had the $15,000 to repair the sewer, he would have made maybe $10,000 on the open market.
Gotcha.
But because we were able to fix the sewer and fix it up and spruce it up,
Increase the price.
he actually made about $30,000.
Wow.
So he made more profit, and I made $30,000. So I
Nice.
got my money back, the
Yep.
25,000 I put in, and made 30,000.
Fantastic.
So the seller made more money, I made money. It was a 2-month little flip.
Yeah.
And it was a way to make that transaction work for both of us. And that was the key, is you solve the seller's problems.
Right.
Right? In a way that is financially beneficial to both of you.
Right. It's win-win.
So it's win-win.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
3 times his profit.
yeah, and so that looks like maybe just, maybe I partnered on a flip, but because I was partnering with the seller had the mortgage in place, so that
Yep.
kind of allowed us to get in and remodel the house. That really is a type of seller financing transaction, is partnering with the seller.
Gotcha.
Okay, so that is an option.
I love it, because then you eliminate the hard money costs.
Oh yeah, which is a big one. For an investor, hard money costs are very expensive.
Exactly.
And so, a lot of investors, you think, when they're thinking seller financing on the buyer side,
Yeah.
they're thinking, hey, I can get this property, I don't have to qualify for a mortgage, and I'm going to turn it into a rental. That's kind of the
Right.
standard thinking with seller financing. I'm going to carry this seller's mortgage at a cheap interest rate
Yeah.
instead of a non-owner occupied mortgage, which is a much higher interest rate.
Right.
And it's a great deal as a rental property.
Right.
But you can do these on flips,
Right.
short-term flips.
Yeah.
And save those hard money costs.
Exactly. Yep. That's the seller financing transactions I've done have been flip ones.
Oh,
Where I
good.
kept the
Yeah.
mortgage in place.
Right.
I didn't have to pay hard money. I went in, remodeled it, flipped it, and then when we sold it, paid out the underlying mortgage.
Right.
And then of course.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
well,
fantastic.
Exactly. Great. Okay. So perfect.
So that's one way.
Okay.
Is just partner with the seller, work out some kind of deal or joint venture with the seller.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay.
The second way, I'm going to kind of go in reverse order now.
Okay.
The second way I want to mention is contracts for deeds.
Okay.
In some states, these are used almost exclusively in real estate transactions.
Got it.
They're not really used here in Utah.
Okay.
It's just never been a thing. You do occasionally see them. I've used them on some short-term projects. They do have some issues that arise that can be difficult to resolve. And if you try one of the other methods, you don't even run into problems at all. So I've never
Got
seen
it.
kind of a reason to go that route, other than some very rare exceptions. With certain, if Utah Housing Authority loan, for example, is staying in place, they're pretty aggressive at calling the due on sale clause.
Gotcha.
But other than that, it is an option that I discuss with clients,
Yeah.
but not used very often.
Okay.
So there's second. The third is lease options,
Oh, okay.
which you wouldn't think of as seller financing, but it
Yeah.
is still, again, it's a way for a buyer to get possession of a house, use of a house, control of a house,
Yeah.
with not owning it.
Right. And potentially buying it.
And potentially buying it.
Yeah.
So the investor or the buyer leases from the owner
Yeah.
with an option to buy sometime in the future.
Right. Like probably rent to own is a more common term people have heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't like that term because the way it's structured does have to be sort of different. The rent to own can be a little ambiguous.
Gotcha.
Right? So the buyer will sign a lease agreement and an option to buy, so let's say 2 years down the road.
Got it.
And the rent to the seller is $1,000 a month.
Yes.
Then the investor will turn around and lease it out to a retail renter
Yeah.
who maybe wants to rent to own or eventually get into the house. and the rent that you charge to that person is $1,200 a month.
Right.
So the investor's going to sit there for 2 years collecting $200 a month cash flow.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the 2 years, that buyer will step in and buy the house from the seller.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Now that can get a little tricky.
Yeah.
Just depending on how it's structured.
Sure.
But I think it's a phenomenal tool. There's no purchase, there's no closing costs. You
Yeah.
know, you generally do not need to get a loan. The underlying mortgage stays in place.
Yep.
It's a rental situation.
So there's
right?
no foreclosure if you don't. Right.
Yeah, there's
It's
no
an
due
eviction.
on sale clause.
Right.
Right, yeah, and then if your tenant that you've leased out to,
Yeah.
breaches their lease, you just
Right.
evict them and you get a
Right.
new tenant.
Exactly.
Right? And you can even collect deposits, option fees
Right.
for the right to buy it. 5, 10, 15, I've seen even $40,000 option fees.
Right.
And if that tenant then breaches the lease agreement and you evict them, you keep the $40,000 option fee, get another tenant who's going
Right.
to pay you another option fee.
Right.
So I would say it's a little bit of a complicated deal, and you're sitting in the middle. So you do have a seller that's still involved, and
Yeah.
a mortgage, and you, and your retail tenant buyer.
Yeah.
So it is definitely, I'd say, an intermediate to advanced
Right.
kind of real estate investment technique,
Yeah.
but it's a fantastic one.
Yeah, and just to elaborate a little more, that would be a sandwich lease
Yeah.
option. You could hypothetically, let's say you own the property,
Mhm.
you could just lease option it out, and then there's
Yeah.
only 2 parties versus 3.
Yes, if you had a rental that you
Yeah.
normally just rent it out long term, you
Yeah.
could, with your tenant, sign a lease option agreement.
Right.
And have them kind of in a rent-to-own situation and not deal with the seller.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And in my experience, if you're comfortable with the house potentially selling, you actually make more money on a lease option, monthly payments, a bigger deposit
Mhm.
than on a traditional rental. And then
Yes.
if they don't execute the right to buy, you keep it and you do it again, and now you've made even more money on the next guy.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely.
Because it's
Yes.
a premium to be able to have
Yeah,
an
and
opportunity
the
to buy.
investors that do this do make pretty good money.
Right.
I do, when I do talk to clients, you have to be aware that option fee is what the investors are looking at.
Exactly.
Like, holy cow, if I collect $20,000 option fee for the
Yeah.
right to buy this house in 2 years, and some reason they either breach their lease or they can't buy the house in the
Yeah.
2 years. They can't fix their financing or their credit or their down payment.
Right.
Right? They do lose that option fee.
Right.
But if it's a big amount, yeah, you can expect that tenant to try and fight it somehow.
Yeah.
Which is why your documentation and your structuring has to be really, really critical.
Yes.
Because very few tenants are going to walk away from $20,000, $30,000,
I agree.
$40,000
Yeah.
simply because they couldn't buy the house. Even though that's what they signed, even though
Yes.
the contract says you're going to lose the money,
Yes.
they're not going to walk away quietly, usually, in those big numbers. So
Exactly.
it is something you need to be prepared for, and that's why I say it's an intermediate.
Yes.
Because there is an issue that could arise.
Yes, I have seen as high as 40,000.
Too.
Not mine. I would say, from my experience, I'd like to hear yours because you've probably seen way more. I usually see 3% of the agreed purchase price if one executes the purchase. So on a $300,000 home, it's $9,000 versus $40,000. What do you
Yeah.
see mostly?
I would say I see mostly in the range of $10,000 to $25,000. Seems
Gotcha.
to be pretty standard.
Okay.
If it's a lower priced home, maybe under $200,000, it might be a $5,000 option fee.
Gotcha.
But on a standard average price home in the Salt Lake Valley, which
Yeah.
is now what, 310?
Yeah,
Something
yeah.
like that. Is that in
Yeah.
the 300s, 340?
Yeah. Median
it's-
was 390.
The median's even 390.
Salt Lake County.
Salt Lake County.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I've seen the 10 to 25,000 option fees.
Gotcha.
Pretty straight across the board.
Got it. Now, if you're a buyer and you're putting 20,000 as a fee, as a deposit, and you execute and you actually buy,
Mhm.
that's a great opportunity for you because
Yeah.
you didn't have to get a traditional loan. That's better than 20% down. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's definitely advantageous for both parties, especially if you execute as a buyer.
Right.
So okay, cool.
Yeah. So then the fourth way.
Yes.
Okay. Which is the most common. So that's
Okay.
why we're ending with the fourth. The fourth way is the way when real estate investors or even homeowners
Mhm.
think of seller financing. This is the one they're thinking about.
Got it.
This is the situation where the seller actually does sell the house in a closing. The buyer buys it, they close,
Yep.
they record title, the buyer takes title, the buyer's the owner.
Yep.
Okay? But in some way, the seller has helped finance the purchase
Gotcha.
through a note and deed or an all-inclusive note and deed or some other financial arrangement.
Yeah.
And so the seller literally becomes a bank. Nothing more. Not an owner of the house, not a landlord like in a lease option,
Yeah.
but an actual bank.
Right.
And the owner gets a monthly payment.
Right.
On interest, with interest of what they've loaned to the buyer.
Yes.
And no money, the neat great thing here is no money changes hands.
Got it, yeah.
The seller doesn't give the buyer the $200,000 to buy the house.
Right.
Because the seller had that in equity.
Yeah.
Or even equity in debt. And so the seller, no money changes hands. The seller's just taking some of his equity, instead of taking the cash now
Yep.
and possibly paying capital gains tax on it,
Right.
he's actually financing his equity to the buyer and earning interest on top of that.
Right.
So the seller will actually make more money in the long run.
Right. Yeah.
And I call that traditional seller finance, or sometimes note and deed seller financing. And there's 3 or 4 ways to structure even that kind of deal.
Got it.
Depending on whether there's an underlying mortgage, whether it's a note and deed or an all-inclusive note and deed.
Right.
So that just gets down to kind of the details of the actual transaction. But they're all sort of variations on a theme of the seller becomes a bank
Gotcha.
in some way.
Gotcha. And probably the cleanest for a seller, right? Because
It is the cleanest.
they don't have
yes.
to worry about anything.
And if a seller doesn't want to be a landlord, because there
Yeah.
are risks, right,
Yeah.
with being a landlord.
Absolutely.
Even though the buyer is sort of responsible for subleasing and all that.
Yeah.
You gotta negotiate that with the seller. And some
Yeah.
sellers are like, I don't want the worry of having tenants in the house and
Right.
what might happen. So some sellers might be skittish on
Yeah.
the lease option
Yeah.
side. And this one, literally, when you become a bank, that's one of the most secure positions you can be in a real estate transaction,
Yeah.
because banks have written all our laws,
Yeah.
and banks win every time,
Right.
right? So
Right.
if you're in a position of a lender, you have the right of foreclosure,
Right.
and it's really difficult to challenge a foreclosure
Yes.
if someone is in default on a loan.
Exactly.
And you just foreclose, you take the house back, including everything you've already received,
Yeah,
possibly.
yeah.
So, and a foreclosure in Utah, because we're a trustee state, is rather straightforward. It doesn't even require a court.
Oh.
You file some documents,
Yeah.
you post it in the newspaper, and then you take it at an auction.
Gotcha. Yeah. Very. And what's great about that too is you don't have to fix. Like you don't call Zion's Bank and go, "Hey, there's a leak in my roof," right? Like you want
That's
a
right.
landlord.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So if you were a bank.
Yeah, you don't care what's happening to the rent and the
Right.
renter and the problems and the issues with the house and possible slip and falls and
Yes.
leaky faucets on 9 o'clock on a Friday night that the
Exactly.
landlord has to go fix.
Right.
Right, you just sit back and you collect your monthly payment. If you don't collect your monthly payment, you foreclose.
Yep.
Just like Bank of America would do.
Yep. Perfect. Okay. Love it. All right, guys. So we are going to cut to a quick commercial break. When we come back, it's the nightmare story time. With all these great opportunities, as Jeff talks about, if you don't structure it right, well, you can find yourself in a nightmare.
But we'll get you out of it.
Yes. And Jeff and I do a podcast as well called Deals A to Z, and we actually did 8 episodes where we interviewed 8 specific episodes where we interviewed 8 specific seller financing investors. We've
Yes.
done more than 8 episodes, but 8 where we blocked away and interviewed these investors. And they shared the good and the bad, and I think Jeff has a story that he's going to share. I don't know if I've heard it yet, but I'm excited to hear it.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, awesome. So we will cut to commercial break. You're not going to want to go anywhere because you will definitely want to know what could happen if it's done wrong.
Did you know the Snappers is the most
Let me just check the
convenient
camera. I heard
place
it
in the
beep.
world? That's
Oh,
right,
my.
the most
Oh, good.
convenient
Okay, perfect. I was like, why did my
place in
camera
the
beep?
world.
So I don't read my commercials anymore. I recorded it. Yeah. Gives me, I don't know, 60 seconds to break.
Yeah, and you don't have to worry about getting it right every time.
Exactly. Yeah, in the beginning, I just didn't know what I didn't know. I wish I would have done this from the beginning, but I thought, I'll just flow through it. I can read it. I don't have to cut to this. And it's because I didn't know how to do this, right? But now I know how. After I learned, I was like, I'm going to record this.
47 in Dallas, Texas,
So,
and ABC4 on
yeah,
midday
all right,
Utah.
let's see.
You are definitely going to want to take a peek at what all the rain is about and what the Snappies can do for you and your
Snappies,
best
Jeff.
friend. Make life
Snappies.
much more convenient.
So push those Snappies.
Yes.
Any traction?
A little bit, yeah. We're working our way up the rankings on Amazon.
Oh, good.
Okay, so let's see. Let me get the next commercial ready. Here we go.
Is it point of providing any income?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. All right, guys, we are back. You're listening to K-Talk Radio 1640 AM. This is the show, Utah Home Sweet Home. I am your host, Yoshi Shiraki. Our special guest is attorney Jeff Bralio, and we are talking about seller financing transactions. And it is the Nightmare Story Time. And I'll tell you why I like the Nightmare Story Time. I used to office with a friend of mine, Trevor Thompson. You know Trevor?
I love Trevor Thompson.
Yes, me too. And what was really cool about me officing with Trevor is we would share, bad nightmares that were happening to us at the moment. And then we would be able to sit there and go, wow, I'm so glad you shared that with me because now I don't have to go through that mistake.
That's right.
You don't know what you don't know
until you actually make a mistake.
Yeah,
so learning from other mistakes is the best way to learn.
Exactly.
You can experience yourself if you want.
Right.
Go for it.
Go down that road again if
That's right.
you feel like.
Do this without knowing anything.
Right.
Take the gamble, roll the dice.
Exactly. So that's why I like the Nightmare Story, because I get to learn from someone else's mistake, what happened, and then the lesson to be learned is so valuable, I think, for myself and the listeners. And so, Jeff, if you don't mind diving into the Nightmare Story that you have for us today, please.
Yeah, in fact, we're going to share two. We're sharing one a little later, too.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
cool. Awesome.
Double whammy today.
Yeah.
Okay, this first one was a seller financing transaction.
Okay.
It was in the world of that traditional or note and deed seller financing that is most common.
Yes.
And in this one, this was what we call a subject to deal.
Got it.
Right? Which means the seller really walked away with all their equity in cash, or if they had no equity, and the buyer just comes in and takes over the mortgage payments on the underlying mortgage.
Gotcha.
So the buyer buys the house, owns it, and then the seller kind of goes away, and the seller's not getting any more payments, and then the buyer's just simply making the mortgage payments that currently exist.
Got it.
Right?
Yep.
So the mortgage stayed in place.
Okay.
So they buy the house, they get it rented out, they're keeping it a long-term rental.
Okay.
It's rented out, all great. And then about 2 years later, the sellers call up and they say, hey, we'd like our house back. And my client says, what are you talking about?
Right.
I bought your house.
Yes.
I don't give houses back.
Right. After I buy them.
Yeah, and they're like, no, we didn't sell you the house. We just leased it to you.
Oh.
So that you could then sort of sublease and make money and help us out of a tough situation because we couldn't make the mortgage payment. And they're like, no, we bought your house. Here's the purchase contract that you signed with the purchase price saying that you're going to sell us the house.
Right, and probably closing docs from the
And
title
then we had
company.
closing docs.
Yeah.
And one of them is a warranty deed, which actually transfers title. I mean, they signed a deed giving ownership of the house to my clients, right?
Yeah.
They signed even a 1099 tax statement that they've sold the house. Yeah, and all the other closing docs. And 2 years later, their argument was that, and the real issue came up because they ended up speaking with, I would say, a disreputable attorney, or at the very least, an inexperienced attorney, which I don't really think he was, because I think he did have experience in real estate, which is why I say disreputable.
Yeah.
But didn't truly understand seller. But you do see this even with attorneys who don't understand seller financing.
Sure.
And they see that mortgage that's still there, right? And their thought process is, wait a minute, if this mortgage stayed in place, the house couldn't have sold, because you have to pay off the mortgage when a house sells.
Right.
Which is not the case.
Right.
Yes, there is a due on sale clause.
Right.
Where the bank says, if you sell the house, we can call the note due, which means we have the right to make you pay it off.
Right.
You don't have to pay off the house when you sell it.
Right.
It's just the bank, if they find out and if they want, they can say, yes, you do have to pay off the note.
Right.
But if they don't say you have to pay off the note, you don't have to pay it off.
Yeah.
Right. And so I've seen, sort of inexperienced attorneys say, no, you have to give the house back because you never paid off the mortgage and you can't do that.
Right.
And then I'm like, well, yes, you can.
Right.
And in fact, it's probably done millions of times a month across the country.
Right.
I mean, it is a very common investor technique.
Yeah.
And I have clients here in Utah that are probably close to 100 properties in these seller financing transactions where the underlying mortgage is staying in place.
Yes. And if I understand correctly, most commercial transactions have a portion of seller finance. Big, multi-million-dollar commercial deals have some segment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so the attorney and the sellers would not back down. When we provided copies, like, look, here's the purchase agreement that your client signed. Here's the warranty deed that your client signed. They sold the house. What more can we tell you about this that you're not understanding?
Right.
So they actually ended up going before a judge.
Oh, wow.
Because they just wouldn't back down. I think they were maybe hoping for some settlement or cash payout, some additional money. Because obviously what had happened, and this is the real reason, what happened over the last 2 years?
The values went up.
The value of the house went up, and so now these, the previous sellers are seeing, $40,000 or $50,000 in equity in their house.
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute, shouldn't I get some of that?
Right.
Kind of thing.
Right.
And I think the attorney's probably thinking, hey, well, they'll maybe pay $5,000 or $10,000 to settle all of this.
Yeah.
And I get some money.
Right.
And that's not the kind of law practice I've ever engaged in. I don't believe in that, but that does happen quite often.
Sure.
So anyways, what happened was my clients were successful. They won. They did have to spend a few $1,000s in legal fees to protect their position and their rights, but they won, and the reason they won was because they had the right documents. They had a good seller financing specific contract. And this is something investors really don't do.
Right.
And as much as I beat my chest and scream from the rooftops,
Yeah.
if you have a seller financing deal where there's a mortgage staying in place, that is a risk. Not only the sellers, in fact, I've seen sellers come back 5 times in the last 2 years.
Wow. Wow.
The other situation where they come back is the seller, maybe 2 years later, wants to buy a new house. And they go to their loan officer to get a loan and a mortgage for their new house, and the loan officer says, I can't get you the loan because you still have this mortgage on your credit report.
Right.
Because the loan officer doesn't understand that he can still get them the loan, even with that in place, and it happens all the time. The sellers just need to speak to the right kind of loan officer who's experienced in those kinds of mortgages, and you can still get it.
Yeah.
But they see that, and the loan officer says, "Oh, what happened? Why did those buyers pay it off? They did something illegal," and then the whole thing kind of blows up.
Yeah.
And it's just from lack of experience and lack of education on seller financing deals that put things into the heads of sellers.
Right.
So they do often come back, and sometimes that due on sell clause, for other reasons, might get called due.
Sure.
Right.
Right.
So you want a contract that really defines that there is an underlying mortgage, that it's going to stay in place, it's going to stay on the seller's credit until it's paid off, whenever that is.
Right.
That the seller understands that the seller may need to, may make getting a new mortgage more difficult, but it can be done.
Right.
And what happens if that note is called due?
Yeah.
And so many investors don't get that into their initial contracts, and then when sellers come back, you've just opened the door to more arguments.
Yeah, yeah.
And even though you're probably still going to be successful defending yourself, the more arguments you give those sellers, the more expensive it is to get your way back out.
Right.
So you want things really tight, really buttoned up, all the right terminology, clauses, and in my seller, I even have sellers initial each one of those paragraphs rather than just about. So they really understand, and the investor buyer should really be explaining this to the sellers.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of investors not truly help the sellers understand what's going on.
Right.
And then later they're confused, and when they're confused, they talk to friends or attorneys, and then they get the wrong information, and then you've got a bad situation.
Right.
So not only get good documents, but explain to the seller, hey, in 2 years, if you do want a mortgage, you can get a new mortgage with this still in place. You just have to talk to the right people and get the right information, and you can solve so many problems simply by educating your sellers.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And that was great that you shared that you've seen this like 5 times recently. Probably in the down market, you didn't ever see it.
Yeah, you wouldn't see it in from 2009 to 2014 because home values stayed pretty low. Yeah. But in the last 4 years, we've saw such high appreciation rate.
Yes.
Sellers are seeing that, and they're regretting selling their house for so cheaply years earlier.
Right, right. Yeah, in the down market, 2-3 years later, it could have even been less. So now they're excited they sold it at that price, right? And because they're now the investor's going, crap, why did I buy this? Even though he got a seller financing, now he's having this undervalued property that's going down year after year. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's great because whenever I've chatted with sellers about seller financing, I share with them what happened back then. Values could go down, but values could go up depending on what happens. Think that through before you agree to something like this, because if values go up, you might have a little bit of remorse that you sold it this way.
Yeah.
If values go down, I'll probably be the one with the remorse. But I think
the other thing on that due on sale clause, because
Yeah.
a lot of investors freak out about it. Experienced investors don't even think about it.
Right.
There are a lot of red flags that you can reduce and eliminate to prevent the bank finding out and calling it due.
Right.
And we teach that in some of our courses. But now I kind of forgot where I was totally going with due on sale clause. Interest rates.
Yeah.
There's always the fear that if interest rates start to go back up,
Yeah.
banks will start actually calling notes due.
Oh, sure.
During downtimes and low interest rates, they're just happy to get the payment. They don't care who's making it.
Right.
And so after 2008, the crash, and they're like, investors were worried that as the times got better, that banks would start increasing interest rates.
Yeah.
And why would a bank leave a mortgage with 4% interest when they know if they call the note due and force somebody to refinance, they're going to get a 6% interest rate.
Right.
And so banks would be more likely to call the notes due if interest rates go up. We never really see interest rates go up a whole lot.
Right.
And to this day, I don't really see a lot. It does happen, absolutely.
Right.
It happens a handful of times. It's usually because somebody says something to the bank that they shouldn't have said.
Right.
It's usually user error than anything else. And you can correct user error.
Right.
But it is something to be prepared for,
Yep.
and have an extra strategy.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Perfect. We are going to take another commercial break. When we come back, Jeff is going to dive into the documents needed for this type of transaction, because guys, you're hearing about this right now, but without the proper paperwork, how do we even move forward? So Jeff's going to break that down for us here shortly, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. Awesome. Sounds good. So then we'll just...
I'm Yoshi Shiraki, the author
I'm
of the
loud.
book, My
I'm loud in my ear.
to educate children on the prevention of child
All right, so we'll go through the different contracts that you have here. Do you need this in front of you?
No,
Okay.
and I'll do that briefly. That'll be like 5 minutes. 'Cause
Perfect.
I'll just say you kind of highlight what they are.
Okay.
And then go on to the next section.
Okay, perfect. And then after you go there, the
Then
next
I'll have
question
another
is...
story.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, how to
avoid risks.
risk. Yes, that's another story. That's a story
Oh, perfect.
from our show.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll go through those, and then the next one is what's the best way to avoid risks.
Yep. Having that tricky conversation with your children. For more information on the book,
Before we talk about this, though, let's talk about your seminar.
OurAngels.com today. And remember, the more we focus on prevention, the less we'll have to focus on rehabilitation.
All right, guys, we are back. You're listening to Kate Talk Radio, 1640 AM. This is the show, Utah Home Sweet Home. I am your host, Yoshi Shiraki. My special guest is attorney Jeff Brailio.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, for joining me. All right, so we are talking about seller financing transactions and the importance of having the right paperwork. But before we do that, I wanted to let you all know that if this is something that you guys are really interested in, Jeff is actually teaching a class on seller financing. Jeff, can you tell us a little bit about what you're going to be sharing on the class, when it is, the time, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
It is in September.
Okay.
It's going to be a sort of a 2-day multimedia event, the whole COVID thing. So
yes.
On Thursday night, September 10th,
Okay.
I'm going to do a webinar on background information on the first things we talked about, the contract for deed, the lease options, and the traditional seller financing.
Okay.
How they're different,
Yep.
and the pros and cons. So you have to understand sort of the basics of seller financing type deals.
Got it.
Okay?
Okay.
And then on Saturday, September 12th, there'll be an all-day live class, and we will be COVID compliant. It'll be an all-day live class where we will get into all the details of traditional seller financing, notes and deeds and all-inclusives, and understanding mortgages and the financing, the contracts, the terms,
Yes.
the disclosures, the risks, the how to avoid the risks. We've got guest speakers. Trevor Thompson, in fact, is going to come guest speak and talk about how to approach sellers with seller financing.
Yeah.
Jeff Rappaport, who hosts the Creative Financing podcast, is going to be there for lunch.
Oh, nice.
And then possibly another surprise speaker in the afternoon.
Oh, cool.
So it is an intensive all-day, everything you really need to know about seller financing deals.
Awesome.
I'm really excited for it. We've been cooped up for a long time. I'm excited to get back out and teach live and actually see human faces again.
Exactly.
And then you can register now. We are actually already half full.
Oh, great.
Which is super fast.
Yeah.
This far out.
No kidding.
But you can register at reimasteryu.com.
Perfect.
And that's REI, which stands for Real Estate Investing. Mastery, because you will become a master. Then the letter U, kind of like university.
Right.
This is where you really learn.
Got it.
You just go to reimasteryu.com, and the registration link's right there, and we hope to see it because it'll be a great experience for everybody involved.
Perfect. And I know you said all day. Did you say the time frame? What's
9 to 5.
9 to 5. Okay.
Saturday. Yep.
Yeah, that's great. That's great because seller financing isn't something you learn, unfortunately, in an hour show like we're doing right now.
No. I'm only introducing things. I'm not really actually teaching you anything.
Yeah.
I wish I could, but you just can't in an hour. I really need the full, it's going to be about 9-10 hours of total class time.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. You know, and it's interesting, Jeff, because with so much uncertainty, we're talking about the low interest rates a minute ago.
Yeah.
I was chatting with a friend of mine, Randall Wall, and you know Randall very well.
And he's a super experienced seller financing investor.
Exactly, super experienced. And you know, with so much uncertainty happening, potential people haven't been able to make their mortgage, landlords not getting rent, so they can't make their mortgage either. There are two thoughts. You know, some people think everything will work out and be okay, and some people think, well, no, how can it be? We've had more unemployment than the Great Depression. We have had more people not being able to pay rent and mortgages in so long. 12 to 24 months, we might see a lot of foreclosures, possibly.
Yeah.
And chatting with Randall Wall, he says, you know, all these people who don't want to go through foreclosure, they want to avoid it.
Right.
Could you seller finance to an investor with low interest rates?
Before that even becomes a problem.
Right.
You spare their credit, the notice of default, and the foreclosure, and all the problems that could cause a couple years down the road when they do want a new mortgage and they get their job back or their income goes up. Yeah, they don't want to ruin things. And I think seller financing is going to explode in the next 24 months.
I agree. So if you're somebody who, you know, wants to take at least get prepared. You know, I can't remember the quote, but you can't take action if you're not prepared to take the action, right? Or you can't take action on an opportunity if you're not prepared.
Right.
So you got to get at least prepared, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
and you don't want to be behind the game because there are other investors who do know what they're doing, and they're going to pick up the deals more quickly because they're comfortable doing this. They've done it a lot.
Exactly.
So
and even to the people who don't even want to invest, they're renters right now, and they are struggling to try and buy their first home. This could be an opportunity for them to become a homeowner.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this class is for everybody.
Yeah, and you know, real estate agents can do these kinds of deals as well.
Right.
And the more they know, they can actually they can help buyers get into homes without being able to qualify for conventional financing. They can help their sellers get out of a tough situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I worry that there's going to be a lot of people who don't know what they're doing on these kinds of deals.
Yes.
But let's keep our fingers crossed that they do kind of get educated and experienced, or work with educated, experienced people so that they are done correctly.
Perfect, excellent. And if any of you missed the information that Jeff shared on how to register for the class, feel free to go to utahhomesweethome.com and you'll see the social media links on the bottom. We have these shows recorded. You could definitely check out the recording and if you've missed that earlier. So I want to dive in though into the different types of paperwork. What documents are needed for these types of transactions?
Yeah, I think the real key here is just understanding that, like we gave 4 major types, right? And then each of those, for example, lease options.
Yeah.
The paperwork's going to be different if you're the buyer tenant or if you're the landlord on the situation, seller.
Yes.
Okay, we actually create a very different set of documents, and with different terms, and they're actually split. Sometimes we combine the lease and the option into one document. The other time we actually use 2 separate documents, and that's the best way to do it because it just we don't have time, but it eliminates problems down the road. And too many people doing lease options don't even understand that.
Yeah.
And then if you're doing a contract for deed, that is a very specific kind of contract. It's not something that's got to be drafted by a lawyer. There's no state forms for that. There's no general things. Right? You need to actually a lawyer for that. And then in a joint venture or partnering with the seller, that's probably a joint venture agreement. You can secure rights with different methods, so that's a different document. And then in the traditional seller financing, right, you need a good contract. If there's an underlying mortgage, you need a good seller financing contract, a specific contract that calls out the due on sale clause and all those other issues we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
You might need a note and deed.
Yeah.
You might need an all-inclusive note and deed.
Right.
You may need powers of attorney that allow the buyer to talk to the bank. So there's a set of documents specific to each one of these deals depending on the kind of transaction you're doing. So that's the key, is getting the right documents for the kind of deal you're doing.
Got it. Which goes back to like hiring the right attorney as well, right? On top of kind of having an idea of what you'll need. As you mentioned before, if you're an attorney who doesn't practice real estate, you're probably not going to know which contract.
Yeah, they might try to fit you into the one that they know.
Yeah.
As opposed to, wait a minute, I can talk to us and know what are you really doing here?
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
And let's make this the best deal as opposed to just doing a straightforward cookie cutter kind of model.
Right, exactly. And here's what I love about you, Jeff, is not only do you...
I'm so glad you love me.
Yes. Thank you. Not only are you super experienced in knowing these documents as a real estate attorney, but you're also the real estate investor. So you know these things from the investor's point of view, which is somebody coming to you for investing help, as well as the attorney's point of view, which is great because we have this belief that if you're going to hire a power team, a real estate agent, contractors, attorneys, insurance agents, it's nice when all of them also invest because they kind of know what your goal is as well, versus an insurance agent who doesn't. We had Lance Polson on the show explaining insurance, and he has a portfolio of rentals, and he flips houses, and so I like dealing with him because he knows exactly what my goals are versus an insurance agent who's never helped anybody do a flip or anything like that.
Yeah, my first project was over 20 years ago now. I think I'm in my 21st year.
Wow.
It was a flip project that I screwed up so badly that I was going to lose money on the flip.
Yeah.
And instead of losing money, I had to turn it into a rental for 2 years.
Yeah.
And get a little bit of appreciation and with the tax benefits of holding a long-term rental.
Right.
Yeah, I just didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
There was no show like this 20 years ago, 1999, to tell me how to do a flip appropriately to make money.
Right.
I was flying blind.
Yeah.
And I made a lot of mistakes. And the next flip I did, I think I made $10,000, and I did all the work myself. I'm like, holy cow, this was a waste of time.
Right.
My hourly was like
$12.
$12 an hour because I did all the work. I'm like, how are people making money in real estate?
Right.
This is not working.
It's so true.
And then I started hitting the more other real estate investing educational opportunities, more experienced investors, and watching and learning from them.
Exactly. Yeah, so true. I've had a client call me once and he goes, hey, I really want to start flipping. I've been looking on Realtor.com. I'm sending you a link. What do you think this would be a good flip? And first of all, it's on the MLS. It's on Realtor.com, right? So it pops up. And, I didn't pull comps, but I just kind of know the area already because I pull a lot of comps. And so, I asked him real quickly, what about this house attracts you to wanting to do it as a flip? And he says, well, the price is low. And it was relative to everything else. But the price was not flip low, right? By the time you renovated it, you were at market value, and then you would be negative. Exactly.
Costs and stuff like closing costs.
Yeah, so had he called, let's say, somebody who had no experience in flipping to do the analysis with him on the phone to have him realize, he may have bought that, right? May have, I don't know if he would have, but when he showed me the property, I said, well, here's the analysis. And then when we broke down the analysis, like, whoa, I wasn't even close. Yeah, thank you.
And the key, what we're talking about is, the lease options, contract for deed, traditional seller financing, partnering with the seller. The more options you know about, the more you can provide the seller. Like in that deal, if you run the numbers, like, okay, this is really going to work with as a flip. Right. You can start looking at maybe partnering with the seller. Right. Or other options. If you leave the seller financing in place, will that make the deal work?
Right.
So it's about the tools in your tool belt that you can pull out when discussing things with the seller to make the deal actually happen and make it work and solve everybody's problems and make it a win-win.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, perfect. So, Jeff, what are the best ways to avoid risks in this? We'll probably wrap up the show with this.
Yeah, so we'll tell the story. And
Yeah.
actually, this is a story that you and I did on our Deals A to Z podcast.
Yeah.
This was a very advanced seller or investor technique.
Yep.
He bought on seller financing.
Yep.
There was a mortgage and a second mortgage that he wrapped when he bought it.
Right.
He then sold it seller financing. So he was in a seller financing sandwich, not just a lease option sandwich, but a
Right.
seller financing
I
sandwich.
remember him. Yeah.
And he had a small loan to do the rehab.
Yeah.
So then he wrapped essentially 3 underlying mortgages to his retail buyer.
Right.
So now there's nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah.
Now you have to understand that in these sandwich situations, you not just double, you actually triple the amount of problems that can arise.
Right.
Because there's things with your seller, that mortgage, what happens to those sellers? Do they disappear? Do they die? What happens if sellers die?
Yeah.
What if the sellers one day then, get really bad financially and have to file bankruptcy?
Right.
And so all these could pull from the seller perspective, pull the house into some conflict.
Yeah.
Something can happen to the investor.
Yep.
And something can happen to your final buyers.
Right.
They may lose their job and so you just have a lot of issues. So what happened though, and even though we structured it was all done correctly, we were using a local escrow company to handle the payments.
Yes.
So the buyers, the final, the tenants, buyers in the house,
Yeah.
were making their payments perfectly
Right.
to this escrow company.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first year, the escrow company was making payments to all the underlying mortgages and sending the money the way it was supposed to. All get set on, all was good.
Yeah.
Then suddenly the escrow company stopped paying the underlying mortgage. The buyers were still making their payments.
Yeah.
So the escrow company had the money in the account to pay the underlying mortgage.
Yes.
And just stopped. And that money just kept building up and building up.
Right.
It was definitely a mistake on the escrow company's part. There's just no way
Right.
that anyone would say, oh yeah, stop paying the underlying mortgage. I mean, that's
Right.
absurd.
Yeah.
Right? And it was 5 or 6 months before the investor found out.
Right.
But by that time, the way the investor found out was the bank, the loan went into default.
Yeah.
So the bank started researching this mortgage and this property and saw that it had sold.
Uh-huh.
So not only did it go into default, not only did it ding the seller's credit,
Yeah.
which damages the sellers,
Right.
but now they're calling the note due.
Yeah.
So you can't just bring it out of default, which normally you can do.
Right,
Bring it out
right.
of default and keep going.
Yeah.
It was too late. The
Yeah.
bank said, no, we don't want to bring it out of default. We are going to call the note due. We want payment in 30 days. The buyers that gave them 30 days to buy a house and they couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And so huge mess.
Yeah.
And the way you saw that, the way kind of when I talk about this experience is don't rely on third parties.
Yeah.
Even though you hired a third party to process this transaction, which is still a good thing. I still recommend it to process it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's still safer.
Yes.
But you're still as the investor, you're sitting in the middle of this, and you need to pay attention. And I would be checking every single month.
Yes.
Did that underlying mortgage get made?
Right.
Is everybody happy? Is everything going exactly the way you're doing?
Right.
Because because the investor, especially in that situation, is the point person.
Yeah.
Everybody was suing him.
Yeah.
Right? The
Yeah.
sellers were suing him and his buyers were suing
Right.
him. Right?
Right.
Even though it wasn't his fault at all.
Right. Exactly.
So, make sure you have good documents
Yeah.
that are clear.
Yeah.
Make sure that the systems and processes to control because remember, this is what we said at the beginning. This is a situation where you're going to be in a partnership with the seller long term after
Yes.
closing, which you're normally not.
Right. Exactly.
You can't just buy it and forget.
Right.
Right?
Right.
You have to understand what happens if the seller dies.
Yeah.
What happens if the note is called due?
Right.
What happens when you go to, say, maybe actually pay off the underlying mortgage?
Yeah.
And the sellers have disappeared and you can't get a payoff request. You can't talk to the bank to get a payoff so you
Yeah.
can pay it off. And you
Right.
can't find the sellers because they've skipped town.
Or passed away. Yeah.
So there's long-term issues because you're in this partnership
Yep.
for a long time that you have to think about and understanding what those are in advance
Yeah.
and coming up with solutions is going to greatly reduce the issues down the road.
So smart. So smart. And just for the listeners, the seller, this middle guy, this investor, you know, when Jeff talks about checking every month, you can log online and check to see if it happened. You don't have to sit on hold or anything.
Yeah, most banks, you know, except for the smaller ones, but most banks have an online portal.
Right.
And you can get access. You can, you can go to the sellers. You're like, well, I don't want to give you my password.
Right.
Just change the password.
Yeah.
The one you both know.
Right. Exactly.
Which is fine. You can set up dedicated bank accounts that you both have access to that don't do anything else. You don't have to steal money. And then you can track in the bank account, is it happening? Is it happening at the bank? You can call the escrow company, confirm with them that it's happening. So there's ways, there's checks and balances. You just have to do them.
Exactly, yeah. And just going back to one more kind of point here, you know, we've been talking about a lot of investors because investors tend to be the ones that just know how to do this because they put the investment in to learn how to do it. But I know somebody who bought their dream home. They're not an investor, just bought their dream home and are living their happily ever after on seller financing.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There are retail buyers, and there are good agents out there too who understand this. They can help their buyers and sellers in these kinds of transactions.
Yep.
So yeah, there are buyers that normally couldn't qualify for a loan, but can get into a house, and a seller can sell a house that they couldn't otherwise sell. So
exactly.
But it is about understanding these kinds of transactions and protecting both parties.
Right.
I really, even when I work with the buyers, my investor clients who are generally the buyers in the situation, and I'm certainly trying to protect them, but I'm like, guys, you got to protect your sellers. Don't forget them, because if something happens to them, it is going to affect you.
Right.
You're going to get pulled into it. So
it's so true.
Do everything you can to explain and protect your sellers as well. And if everybody really understands the deal, everybody's got the protections that they really deserve, these things work absolutely fantastically.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, Jeff, we're at the end of our show. I want to thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Love always being on your show.
Love it. Love having you on my show. All right, guys. Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed today's show. Again, Jeff, really quickly, what's your website again that people can register for the class?
REIMasteryU.com, and that's letter U.
Yep. REI, Real Estate Investing, Mastery, and then U as in university, REIMasteryU.com. If this is something that you want to learn, maybe pick up your dream home or become an investor to utilize this strategy, definitely check out Jeff's seminar that he's got coming up in September. And on that note, I hope everybody has a spectacular rest of the day.